Everyone. Today, as we will discuss Israel's foreign policy in the context of the current ongoing crisis in Israel and the challenges Israel faces both internally and externally, it is crucial to remember that on this significant date, September 11th, we reflect not only on the challenges faced by nations across the globe, but also on the importance of international cooperation and security in an ever-changing world. In that particular context, we must underscore the vital role that organizations like FELNET play in the shaping of international relations. FELNET's tireless efforts to foster stronger ties between Israel and Europe are instrumental in addressing common challenges, promoting dialogue, and advancing shared values. Just today, FELNET hosted a panel at the 22nd World Summit on Counterterrorism, the ICT, at the Reichman University in Herzliya to discuss the similar challenges that both European countries and Israel face in regards to terrorism, terrorism funding, and counterterrorism prevention mechanisms. Today, we will delve into Israel's impending constitutional crisis and its profound implications for the country's internal cohesion and foreign relations. While a potentially historic Saudi normalization agreement is on the horizon, as well as the role of Europe in global and regional diplomacy. In order to help us understand what the hell is going on, we have with us today Tal Schneider, who is the political correspondent for the Times of Israel. Ms. Schneider served as the DC correspondent for Ma'ariv Daily and political correspondent for the Globes. She's a frequent commentator on Israeli radio and TV stations and the recipient of the 2015 Ometz Award for Public Courage and Integrity and the 2012 Google Digital Excellence Journalism Award. So without further ado, I'll straight and shoot you the first question. Tomorrow, the Supreme Court of Israel will discuss in a hearing, quite historic, the legality of the controversial reasonableness law that passed in the Knesset quite recently, while there's last-minute negotiations that are ongoing at the president's residence. So between Netanyahu's quite historical, debatable credibility to stand by agreements and the opposition's quite stubbornness, are we in the wake of a constitutional crisis? And what does that even mean in Israel?
Right. So as per the negotiations, I'm not sure the president's house is engaged as much as you said. The president has been very engaged in the past, but I'm not sure that this time around this is the case. I know that the Prime Minister office is trying to come up and say there is such engagement because they need some sort of, Netanyahu want to present some sort of consensus, and if not getting any consensus from the opposition, so he's trying to get some sort of an umbrella protection from the president. I don't think Israel's president, Yitzhak Herzog, wants to be in that position. So for now, as per negotiation, I'm not pretty sure there are any at this point. Benny Gantz has been saying even today that if Netanyahu wants to really have a negotiation, he needs to prove that he's willing to do something, because up until now, every time there was a leak to the press about the so-called negotiation, Netanyahu came out immediately and said, "Oh, I'm not agreeing to anything like that. This is just a media hoax, and it's not true," and so on and so forth. So, Benny Gantz came up and said, "Excuse me, if you are totally unwilling, as your spokesperson says, or are you playing games with me? I had enough playing games with you. It's not the case. It's a serious issue." So, I'm not sure there are any negotiation at the moment. There might be. But, basically what Netanyahu suggested, according to what we know, he suggested to go back to the plenum and kind of change and, cut down the meaning, the full gamut of the meaning of the reasonableness bill. And, between today, when Netanyahu supposedly saying it or suggesting it for negotiation, up until when the plenum will convene by the end of October, Netanyahu can just, take back his words, because we've seen again and again in Israel's recent history, I'm talking about recent years, that he is promising things, but he never fulfilled them. So this is just words and not statements. and it doesn't apply to his own promises. And the reason, I mean, this is not just me saying, this is his partners from the government are saying it. You know, some of them go out and call him bluntly a liar. I don't even do that. I mean, this is things that we heard from his coalition partners and political partners. So the problem with all of those Netanyahu's either unilateral negotiations or bilateral negotiations or statements or any kind of consensus he's trying to put together, the problem with all of those is that people think that they are just words and there isn't any meaning behind them. And therefore, even if we see something tonight as per Netanyahu's statements, I'm not sure the court will take it seriously tomorrow. And the reason I think Netanyahu is coming up with those statements or unilateral steps is, to my understanding, is to impress the American president when they meet next week in New York. So I think this is the goal. I don't think the goal is really to impress the court. I don't think the goal is to impress Benny Gantz or the president. I think it's all geared towards Netanyahu's visit to the UN next Thursday. He wants to come up to Biden and say, I have the president on board with me, and or at least I suggested such and such. This is my intentions. I have really good intentions. I think the unreasonableness law that he wants now to cut back, he just passed it. He just voted for that less than 2 months ago. So what's the point in just cutting back on something you just passed? And who can trust you if you just were, when voting for that? Why, are you on the merits? Do you think the bill is problematic, or is it just tricks in order to convey a message that is suitable for next week?
So there's a lot to unpack here, but before we jump across the ocean to the US, if we go towards tomorrow's hearing, is there any possibility that the court will actually, contradict or will disagree with the law and send it back? What happens when that happens?
So the courts tomorrow, this is a hearing, which means many parties, including the Attorney General, the Israeli Parliament, the Knesset, the government representative, and people who appealed to the court, some public NGOs, some people who were in the military, and so on, many parties, they're going to make their arguments heard. And the courts with a 15 judges panel will sit in the first time in Israel's history by such a large panel. We've never had that before.
And why is that?
This is unlike the United States. The court in Israel doesn't sit in large panels. They sit in a panel of 3 or panel of 5. The Supreme Court's president set the panels according to the issue. We don't have a permanent panel of 11, 13, or 15 judges at all. And the reason she convened such a large panel is because this may be the first time the Supreme Court will actually annul a basic law. Now, the Supreme Court has heard arguments with respect to cancellation or striking out of basic law, but never before the proximity of such a ruling, striking down a basic law, was really on the table. For example, a couple of years ago, people appealed against the national the Chok Yesod HaLeom. It's the nation state basic law. And I think they had a large panel of 11 judges, and they debated the question whether the Supreme Court has the authority or not at all, at large, to even hear a case or to even discuss the possibility of striking out a basic law as opposed to just regular laws. This is Israel's semi-constitutional laws. And
right.
They came up to the conclusion back then that they have the authority, but that was not the right time, at the time with the nation state basic law. They said, we are not going to strike it down. We need to know that back at that time, the nation state basic law was debated in Israel's parliament for several years. and it was debated carefully. It went up and down with discussions, and it was, like a wide range. And also the bill, they got the support of parties from the opposition for that basic law, and that basic law, the character of that basic law was constitutional. This time around, the character of this bill is unconstitutional. It was debated for like 4 to 5 weeks. They did not hear security implications. They did not hear experts' opinion. And obviously, they voted only based on coalition lines. No one from the opposition was willing to participate. So there is a real argument here that those basic law became some kind of political arrangement bills that are being done just, out of hand, without, third or thought. And this is the reason we think that the Supreme Court may actually strike it down, even though I'm not sure that will happen, and definitely won't happen tomorrow. If it will happen, it will take a couple of more weeks, probably up to 2 months or so.
So in that sense, let's say that it does happen. Let's go with that theory, because we heard several members of the coalition, like, for example, the Speaker of the Knesset, Amir Ohana, said that he will not necessarily listen, or in other words, he said that he will not necessarily listen to whether the Supreme Court will strike down this law. But other members of the coalition say that they will listen to anything that the court will say, regardless if they agree with it or not. Is that something that will undermine the coalition?
Yes, that's certainly something that may, hurt politically. For example, if Netanyahu will adhere to the court's ruling, and he will, he keeps on saying, I don't know, I can't believe it that the court will strike down a basic law. He keeps saying it. But let's say the court does strike down the basic law. I think, general opinion here is Netanyahu will not go against the Supreme Court rulings, and he will adhere to that. And that may cause a political, breaking point in his Likud party, because his justice minister and the Speaker of the Knesset and other members of the coalition from Religious Zionist Party and other parties, they keep on saying, no, we should not, the court shouldn't touch that. And if the court touches that, this is the end of democracy. This is anarchy. This is chaos. We cannot go there. He doesn't say that exactly. He keeps on saying, I don't think the court will go there. So he's avoiding the question. And, Daniel, I myself, I sometimes think that at least the Supreme Court president, Esther Chayut, she may not go there as well, because we've seen her in the past coming up with solutions. And I don't think she's completely eager to strike down a basic law, because she knows the implications, and she may think it's not good for the country to go there. So, but obviously she cannot, the Supreme Court or the Israel judicial system cannot live with this type of, they stripped in this unreasonableness basic law. They actually, they took out Supreme Court powers and all courts powers. So this is the first time in Israel's history that the parliament is actually enacting something that is hurting the court to make a decision. And I don't think they can live with that, but she might need to come up with some sort of solution.
And we spoke about, like you just mentioned, about the coalition, what it might do to the coalition. But we also heard from all of the security apparatus that there's also sort of a vacuum or a gap between who will they then listen to? What would that create if, let's say, in a few months there's some sort of constitutional crisis between the Supreme Court and the Knesset and the Parliament? What will happen then of the head of the IDF or the head of the ISA, the Shabak, and the Mossad, who some sort of alluded to the fact that they will listen to the court in some way?
They don't say we should listen to the courts. They say we listen to the rule of law. We listen to Israel's dinim, rule of law. The rule of law is above executive power, is above legislative power. We listen to that. The rule of law means listening to a ruling by the Supreme Court. For example, let's say the Supreme Court strikes down this basic law. It means that Israel's judicial system gets their power back in, for example, making decisions with respect to nomination. So let's say the military, the IDF, nominated someone who is completely unfit for some crucial job in the military. I'm just giving an example here. It has to be totally unfit, and we're not talking about, it has to be like taking someone who was convicted in a crime and installing him as the chief of something, right? This is like totally unfit for the job. And right. Some people take it to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court doesn't lightly, strike down nominations by the executive power. But if they do so who will the IDF listen? The IDF will, according to what we know for now, they will adhere to this ruling, because the courts were, if this bill will be stricken out, the courts will be given back their power to cancel nominations. And I have to go for just, so you understand what I'm talking about. Netanyahu nominated Minister of Interior Aryeh Deri. Aryeh Deri was convicted 3 times in tax evasions. The last time he was convicted, this is the chairman of Shas. Last time he was convicted was, around 12 months before that. And during his conviction at the court, he stood up at the court. He was convicted, obviously, at magistrate court, not at the high court. And during his conviction, which was under a plea bargain, he said, I will not go back to political life and I will not touch public money anymore. So he promised that to the court during a plea bargain. In exchange for this promise, he was giving a very light fine. Moving forward, 6 months later, he's running for election, saying that he's not obliged by the promise and the pledge he made to the court. So this case came to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said, this is a very, very extremely unreasonable decision to nominate this person who was convicted 3 times. It's unreasonable to nominate him as Interior and Health Minister. So this is something the court strike down. The main reason that we are now seeing the unreasonableness bill, basic law, is because this coalition did not like the fact that the Supreme Court, strike down his nomination. So this is what we're talking about. It has to be very unreasonable case. It's not just lightly any type of case.
One of the counter arguments of the coalition, though, is that when Aryeh Deri was nominated as a minister, it was after he won a certain amount of seats in the parliament as a head of a party. So one of the counter arguments of the coalition right now is that it was the choice of his voters. So how is that also unreasonable in that sense? What do you make of that on the other hand of the political spectrum?
Because through the years, and this is the rule of law, through the years, the Supreme Court of Israel has said, democracy is not just about getting popular vote. It is about more than that. You get the popular vote, you are taking power as the executive power. It doesn't mean that you can override everything that is happening in the country. If someone stood in the court and said, I'm not going to go into public life, and for that exchange, he got a very convenient plea deal and was convicted, but in a not a big fine, because obviously he said, I'm not going to touch public money. Then, so people voted for him, but also the court of the people also convicted him. So, democracy is not just about popularity. You have to balance between judicial affairs to the rule of law to other concepts. I mean, if you're a majority, it doesn't mean that you can just hurt the minorities of the country. We have a huge minority here of Arabs, 21%. They never win election, obviously, because they are a minority. They never get to be in the executive branch. So it doesn't mean that the executive branch can just hurt them and not grant them with budgets and so on. I mean, they are a minority. They need the protection of the majority. So all of those concepts, I mean, it's not new to you. There is checks and balances, the separation of powers. All of those concepts are part of democracy, not just the election winning.
Right. Another thing I would like your analysis on is regarding Netanyahu's alleged potential unilateral concession right now regarding this bill, and then we'll move on to foreign policy part of that. We heard from other members of his coalition, not from the Likud, either Ben Gvir or Smotrich, that said that they will not accept any concession, even unilateral. Do you think there's some sort of a political risk here that Netanyahu is playing? Is there a possibility that he will make a concession and change that law without his government falling, and then this crisis will end?
Up until now, through these 9 months of this government, almost 9 months of this government, Netanyahu was not able to maneuver or put forward anything without, Yariv Levin, the justice minister, was opposing strongly any type of agreements or consensus, or so. Even we saw on the plenum on the day of the vote for the unreasonableness law, basic law, that there was a compromise on the table. The defense minister Yoav Gallant was trying, in all of his efforts to put, to allow some sort of a compromise. He almost reached a compromise with Benny Gantz and other people from the opposition, and the justice minister just was totally against it. And obviously, both heads of the religious Zionist, Smotrich and Ben Gvir, they went very, very strong against it. So Netanyahu is actually unable, and you have to understand, even if Netanyahu brings Benny Gantz on board, Benny Gantz has 12 seats, and the religious Zionist has 14. So if they are stepping out and Benny Gantz is stepping in, it's not enough. So it doesn't balance. So Netanyahu is actually, I think his hands are tied with those extremists on his side who do not want to see any kind of compromise. It's weird to see, by the way, that in recent months we've seen the ultra-Orthodox Shas, as I mentioned, Aryeh Deri, and the United Torah Judaism, headed by Goldknopf at the moment. Both parties are actually pushing forward for more compromising tones. But whenever so the Likud itself, the ruling party, the tone of many of its members became so extreme that even if Netanyahu is trying to mitigate the tones, or is trying to give a statement that is more mellow and is trying to just reach out, he always gets shoved by the last minute by his both ministers from the Likud and minister from the religious Zionists, Smotrich, Ben Gvir, and the rest of them. So it's a problem.
Interesting. So as we will move now into a bit more foreign policy, I also want to remind our audience to feel free to submit their questions to the usual Q&A, and we'll address them quite soon. So moving across the ocean now, Netanyahu is set to travel to the United States for the first time since his new elected government. And he's set to meet Biden, but not in the White House, as so far as it was announced. He's going to meet him at the United Nations during the United Nations General Assembly. What is the current state of relations between the United States and Israel? Does Biden on purpose doesn't want to meet him in the White House? What's happening?
So obviously Biden wanted to see from Netanyahu a much softer tone. They don't like many of the things that are going on here with respect to the unreasonableness bill, basic law. It was just, I think, really a slap in the face of everyone, of the protest movement here, of the left, of the opposition, and in the White House, Netanyahu went on the phone back in March or April and promised Biden that he will put forward any legislation only in consensus. He also made that promise to the rating agencies, all of those groups that are rating Israel's credit, situation. We have seen in recent months the Israeli shekel plunge as in the United States, we have a very high rate of
interest rates.
The interest rate is very high, and the Israeli shekel has weakened very much in recent months. And, according to all analysts, this is because Netanyahu promised to do things in agreement and consensus, and he just slapped everybody in the face and just not done it. So they were supposed to convene the judicial committee to appoint judges. They didn't do it. They were supposed to get into consensus with the unreasonableness. Basically, they didn't do it. I think there's very low expectation on behalf of Biden. Personally, I don't think he trusts Netanyahu as well. He has many years of experience. He's going to meet him in the UN, which means Netanyahu is not going to get the full White House treatment. I've been traveling with Netanyahu for many years, both to the White House and to the UN. So in the White House, what you get is more than an hour, sometimes 90 minutes, and you get the staff meetings in the sidelines, and a lot of work is being done around the meeting. What you get in the UN is that Biden has to meet probably 15 world leaders, and this is like pasitzur. It's like how do you say that? It's like a
factory. It's one after the other.
Like a mechanism where one leader in, one leader out. Then you get, so the leader is in. They bring two flags, smiling to the cameras and press media get out. They talk for 20 minutes. Leader gets out. They change the flags. They bring the next France or Germany or whatever, and the German media is in, and eyes to the camera, out, talking for 20 minutes, and so on. So there isn't really an opportunity for depth in discussions. And I think Biden right now, main focus of Biden is getting the Saudi on board. This is not about Israel. I think it's about distancing the Saudis from the Iranian and the Chinese. So in order to distance them from the Chinese and from the Iranian, what they're doing is they're coming up with this new initiative of transportation around the Middle East. And in order to do that, they want what they call now a regional integration. That it means that Israel and Saudi will not be, I don't think it's a peace deal at the moment, but maybe some sort of regional understanding in order to get there. This is a big promise for the Israeli people, for Netanyahu. So I do think that when Netanyahu will get his 20 minutes with Biden, we might get big announcement from those 20 minutes. So it's not going to be contentless. It will be, again, this is a huge gift or gesture for Netanyahu. After so many months of not meeting, he will finally get both a meeting and a grand announcement. So that is what we're expecting. But we'll have to see.
And what do you think that announcement will be? Will that be regarding the connectivity project of how India will be connected to Europe, or will that be something more concrete regarding the Israel-Saudi Arabia relations?
So the connectivity project was already announced in the G20.
Right.
And it was announced yesterday or day before that, and it was announced that Israel is part of that project, and that's a big deal for Israel, obviously. We need to see how this will move forward, because as long as we don't have a relationship with Saudi Arabia, it's a little bit of a problem to get connected. But I think they need to, I don't know how willing the Saudis are to move ahead, because what the Saudi wants and what the Biden administration wants, they want to see a change with respect to the Palestinians. And this is something that Netanyahu wants to do, but cannot do because of the extremists in his government. So we do hear comments coming from Ben-Gvir or Smotrich saying, excuse me, but a peace with Saudi Arabia doesn't worth our forgetting about annexation. The land is ours. We will never give it out. We are unwilling to talk about anything that relates to the two-state solution. All we want to do is annex our land and so on. And this is their talking points. And some of them are coming up and saying it's not worth. The Saudi peace deal is not even. It's Saudi integration, regional integration, as they call it now. We are not willing to change our stance with respect to annexation for any type of.
So let me ask you this: in the past, I'm not sure if all of them, but most of them in Israel, the peace treaties or agreements were done mostly by right-wing coalitions, right-wing governments, with support as well from opposition. What's the likelihood today, if Netanyahu brings to parliament some sort of agreement with Saudi Arabia, will parties like Gantz or Lapid, just because of political agenda, refuse to vote in favor for it and then not let it pass? Because if Smotrich and Ben Gvir, for example, not vote in favor, but some parties of the coalition, of the opposition, I'm sorry, will do. Is that a possibility?
Benny Gantz and Yair Lapid, and let me also say Labour, will never vote against any type of agreement with Saudi Arabia. And also Lieberman from Israel Beitenu, I can guarantee that to you. Obviously, depending on the content, if this agreement will include enrichment by the Saudi Arabia, so they're going to have a lot of comments and a lot of debate on that. But if this agreement, it's in regional integration, will not include some sort of enrichment, and let's say it's civil nuclear power, but the enrichment is done outside of the area of Saudi Arabia, or the enrichment is done by an American factory on the land of the Saudi. I mean, I don't know all the details, but there are some options. But if it's not a security threat to the region, so you can count on them to vote for it. The problem is who will vote for it from the Likud, and who will vote for it from the coalition? Because, as I said, if this includes some favors and some steps towards two-state solution, so if Netanyahu can come up with a deal that gives nothing to the Palestinians, doesn't give enrichment to the Saudis, and bring on a connectivity project, everybody will vote for that. Nobody will, not even Ben Gvir. But as long as any type of disagreement will give the Palestinians some rights in area A, B, C, some some enhancement in their status, some preference in lands ownership, and so on, any of this type of anything that will strip away the annexing intentions. Smotrich doesn't hide his intentions to annex the entire West Bank. So if you see any kind of agreement that takes off anything from the Jews in the region and gives it to the Palestinians in the region, I suspect they will not vote for that. So if Netanyahu is counting on passing through this type of an agreement only with Benny Gantz and Lapid, the government will just, what's the point of this government? It will cease to exist.
But this morning we heard Tzachi Hanegbi, the National Security Advisor, said that in the ICT conference actually, that he is talking directly to the Palestinians on behalf of Netanyahu. So Netanyahu is advancing this.
And Daniel, I have to tell you, this is such unbelievable hypocrisy, because anytime that something littlest was done between Gantz and the Palestinian Authority as a defense minister, or Lapid as foreign affairs minister, when they even talked on the phone to Mahmoud Abbas, they met him, they did anything little to ease the situation of the Palestinians, Netanyahu and the rest of them were just shouting and yelling and saying they're selling the country and so on. Now we see the Tzachi Hanegbi, it's the National Security Advisor, actually coming up and saying, yes, we are in a negotiation, we're doing things, and silence. We don't hear anything from them. It's amazing, those people. I mean, it's just such an hypocrisy.
Right. And in the sense, right, of the National Security Advisor, I want to ask you a little bit about the security situation within Israel, because we've heard also from the security apparatus that all of this internal conflict has created some sort of gap in security deterrence, I would say. Is it something that also pushes the government to lean towards more of a concession, or is that a real situation, or is that some sort of like pumped by the protests, or what's the situation?
The situation is that you have around a couple of hundreds of pilots, combative pilots, that are unwilling to participate in practice or in reserve duty at the moment. It's a hugely problematic situation. The IDF and Netanyahu, they prefer not to talk about it, and they are trying to hide the numbers. We do see a huge problem from the reserves units, all kind of reserve duty units, the cybersecurity, the intel, the anti-missiles, some commander units, and the pilots, as I said. This did not yet went down to in Israel, you have two types of reserve duty. You have a mandatory reserve duty, and you have volunteering reserve duty. So the big problem is the volunteering reserve duty. In the mandatory reserve duty, it's not completely there, because if the mandatory reserve duty, if they don't show up, they may end up going under trial and getting fines, or even jail time. So you don't see that yet. And in the mandatory service, just the 18 years old, between 18 and 22, you don't see, it's not there yet. So you don't see a big resistance in those ranks, in the lower ranks. What you do see is the sort of the special forces and people who have done reserve duty for so many years. They've reached the age of 40 and 50, and they are, it sounds kind of elders, but I have to tell you, many of them are very crucial to the system because they're very experienced. They've been doing some desk jobs, so even cyber desk jobs that are very crucial to the country. And I think we have a huge problem out there. And obviously it hurts Israel deterrence. We see a uptick, or ups, how do you say that? More threats from the Iranians. We had the Israel's Mossad chief yesterday saying that the numbers of terror threats from Iranians, not in Lebanon, in the West Bank, have grown in huge manner in recent year. So,
and these people, most of them have joined the protest or have come out in one way or another to protest against what's going on. And my question to you is, we've seen now over 35 weeks of consecutive protests in Tel Aviv and across the country, who are protesting against that reform and what's going on, and mostly against the government. What's the end? Because what we see is that there's somewhat of a gap between the leaders of the protests and the political opposition. So if, for example, the reform will stop, or Netanyahu goes on a concession or unilateral, or even with an agreement of one of the opposition parties, will the protests stop?
It's okay. So as we speak right now, we have around 30,000 people protesting in Jerusalem in front of the Supreme Court before tomorrow's crucial hearing. The protest movement is not trying, as far as I know, at the moment, to go into national politics. They made a decision to support local politics, but not on the national level. But none of the leaders is personally, himself or herself, is part of the politics at the moment. And when you say there will be a consensus, Daniel, the question is, consensus about what? Is it a consensus about the unreasonableness basic law? Or we have the draft bill, we have other bills. I mean, this government has put forward around 250 different bills, part of basic bills, some of them is just regular bills. For example, the Israel's communication minister has decided to take a complete power grab of Israel's media. This seems to you, as people maybe in Europe and the United States, it seems very weird. How do they do it? but you only have to look into Hungary and Poland and to see what rules and what bills have passed in those countries, or Turkey, by the way, to see what have they done, the government done. And there is a bill currently. There is a bill that the meaning of the bill is that any TV channel in Israel will be subject to fines and to a complete control of either by fines or by nominations or by some sort of mechanism that will control the media in a almost authoritarian way. And I did not hear Netanyahu saying, I will pass this bill only on consensus. I did not hear Netanyahu saying this bill is unworthy of a democratic country. So when you ask me what type of, there is so many things on the table. One thing that is maybe weird to you is that Netanyahu gave about dozen of interviews in American media outlets, but he doesn't speak in Hebrew. So we have no interview from him. We cannot talk to him. We cannot interview him in Israel. I'm working for the Times of Israel. We have a huge website in English. If he wants to talk in English only, we could have done it in Israel. No, but he speaks to Wolf Blitzer and to Peterson, bloggers, Mark Levin, or Sean Hannity,
right,
and Face the Nation. I can't remember the names of all of it. Marta. He talks to them in English, or he doesn't talk in Hebrew. So the media scene. I don't know if people will stop protesting because we have so much on the plate. I didn't even talk about the draft bill, which is another crazy concept here in Israel. So all of his ministers are coming up day and night with this crazy, crazy stuff. They want to turn the country into Hungary or Poland. This government keeps close connection with the Orban government. This is not just ideology. They actually work together with the Orban government. Some parts of this government works with other European ultra-nationalist right-wing. They even keep in touch with the Putin administration.